The man's hand slammed against the counter so hard the salt shaker jumped. I watched it wobble, then settle. His voice came sharp, cutting through the quiet of the diner, like a blade through old cloth. I said, I need service now. Are you deaf, old man? I did not answer right away. I had learned long ago that silence carries more weight than any word. The fluorescent light above flickered once, casting his face in a brief shadow. He was young, maybe 35. His suit was expensive, the kind that whispers money before the wearer opens his mouth. A gold watch caught the light on his wrist. He stood too close to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something sharp and chemical, the scent of impatience made liquid. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched into blackness. It was past 11. The gas station across the cracked parking lot hummed with a single working pump, and somewhere beyond the road, coyotes called to one another in voices older than any of us.
I had stopped here because my truck needed fuel and my body needed coffee, nothing more. The drive from Los Angeles had been long, the kind of drive a man takes when he needs to think, when the city becomes too loud and the silence of the desert calls like an old friend.
The diner was nearly empty. A few truckers sat in the corner booth, their conversation low and tired. An elderly waitress moved behind the counter with the slow grace of someone who had spent decades on her feet. Her name tag said Dolores. Her eyes, when they met mine briefly, held the kind of knowing that comes from watching thousands of strangers pass through. I had taken a seat at the counter, ordered black coffee, and waited. That was when the young man walked in. He had entered like he owned the place. Phone pressed to his ear, voice loud, words clipped. Something about a deal, a deadline, numbers that meant nothing to me. He ended the call and looked around the diner as if surveying territory he had just conquered. When Dolores did not immediately appear at his side, his face tightened. Hello, service. She was pouring coffee for one of the truckers. She raised a finger, the universal gesture of 1 moment please, and finished what she was doing. That was when he moved to the counter. That was when he slammed his hand down, 3 seats away from me. That was when he called me old man, though he was not speaking to me. Or perhaps he was speaking to both of us. To anyone who looked like they had lived long enough to slow down. I lifted my coffee cup and took a sip. The brew was weak but warm. Warmth has its own value. Dolores walked over to him, her face professionally neutral. What can I get you, sir? Finally, he said. A club sandwich. Make it fast. I have somewhere to be. Kitchen's a bit slow tonight. Only 1 cook. Might be 15 minutes. 15 minutes? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. This is a diner, not a 5-star restaurant. How hard is it to make a sandwich? I'll put the order in right away, sir. She turned and walked toward the kitchen window. I watched her shoulders, the way they held tension she would not show on her face. She had done this before, absorbed the rudeness of strangers, carried it quietly. The young man pulled out his phone again, scrolling through something, his jaw tight with irritation. Then he glanced at me. Can you believe this place, he said, as if we were allies in his frustration. I set my cup down. Seems quiet. I like it quiet, he snorted. Quiet is one word for it. Dead is another. I don't know how people live out here. Middle of nowhere. No cell service half the time. It's like stepping back 50 years. Some things were better 50 years ago. He looked at me more closely then. I knew what he saw. An old man in a worn denim jacket. Gray hair, thin now, combed back from a weathered face. Hands wrapped around a coffee cup. The knuckles scarred from work done long before Hollywood knew my name. I looked like what I came from. A coal miner's son. A man who had known hunger before he ever knew fame. No offense, he said, but that's what old people always say. The past wasn't better, it was just slower. Inefficient. The world moves fast now. You either keep up or you get left behind. I nodded slowly. Maybe so. He seemed satisfied with that. He had won some small victory in his mind, correcting the old man in the diner. The minutes passed. He checked his watch twice, then 3 times. His leg bounced against the stool. The truckers in the corner finished their meal and left, the bell above the door chiming softly as they went. Now it was just the 3 of us. The young man Dolores somewhere in the back, and me. This is ridiculous, he muttered. He stood and walked toward the kitchen window, leaning over the counter to peer through. Hey, how long does a sandwich take? I've been waiting 20 minutes. It had been 12, I had counted. Dolores appeared, her face still calm. Just a few more minutes, sir. Cook had to step out for a moment. Family emergency. Family emergency? That's not my problem. I'm a paying customer. I understand, sir. I'm sorry for the wait. Sorry doesn't get me to Phoenix on time. He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair. Then he looked at me again, as if expecting agreement. You see what I'm dealing with here? This is exactly what's wrong with this country. No one takes pride in their work anymore. No efficiency, no professionalism. I thought about professionalism. I thought about the sets I had worked on. The directors who demanded take after take, the hours standing in the cold or the heat, waiting for the light to be right, waiting for the sound to be clean, waiting for something none of us could control. I thought about patience, the cooks dealing with family, I said. That matters. Everything matters to someone. That doesn't mean I should have to wait. There was something in his voice, not just impatience, something harder. Fear, maybe. The fear of a man who measured his worth by how fast he moved, how much he controlled. A man who had never learned that some things cannot be rushed. What do you do? I asked, not because I cared about his job, because I wanted to understand him. Venture capital. Tech investments, mostly. I spot opportunities. I move fast. I close deals. That's how you win. Win what? He blinked. What do you mean, win what? Win at life. Success. Money. Influence. The things that matter. I looked at my coffee cup. It was nearly empty. The reflection of the fluorescent light shimmered on the dark surface. I knew a man once, I said, back in Pennsylvania where I grew up. He worked the coal mines, 14-hour days, 6 days a week. He never made much money, never had influence, never closed a deal in his life. The young man's expression shifted, somewhere between boredom and polite tolerance. He was humoring the old man now. He died when I was 15, I continued. Cave in, they pulled his body out 3 days later. Whole town came to the funeral. People I had never seen before. They came because he had helped them, fixed their roofs when they couldn't pay, shared food when they had none, sat with them when they were sick. I paused. The diner was very quiet. At his funeral, nobody talked about how fast he moved. They talked about how he made them feel. They talked about his hands, how they were always building something, fixing something, helping someone. They talked about his patience. The young man shifted on his stool. Something flickered across his face. Discomfort, maybe, or the faint stirring of something he had buried long ago. That's a nice story, he said. But this is the real world. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills. No, I agreed, it doesn't. Dolores emerged from the back with a plate. The sandwich looked good. Fresh bread, thick-cut meat, crisp lettuce. She set it in front of the young man. Sorry again for the wait, sir. He did not thank her. He picked up half the sandwich and took a bite, chewing with the efficiency he prized so highly. I reached for my wallet to pay for my coffee. As I did, the door chimed again. A man walked in, older than me, wearing a faded trucking cap and a jacket patched at the elbows. He moved slowly, the way people move when their joints have seen too many years. He sat down at the counter, 2 stools away from the young man, and nodded to Dolores. Evening, Dolly. Just coffee tonight. You got it, Earl. They knew each other. The easy familiarity of regulars. Earl glanced around the diner, and his eyes landed on me. He squinted, the way people do when they are trying to place a face. I had seen that look many times. Sometimes people recognized me. Sometimes they did not. It depended on the light, the context, how much they expected to see someone like me in a place like this. His eyes widened slightly. He leaned forward, then sat back, as if unsure whether to speak. Dolores brought his coffee. As she set it down, she followed his gaze to me. Her face changed, a soft recognition. She was older than Earl, old enough to remember the pictures from the beginning, the westerns, the war films, the quiet roles before the loud ones. Oh my, she said quietly. Oh my goodness. The young man looked up from his sandwich, irritated by the interruption. What? Dolores pressed a hand to her chest. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. She looked at me with something like wonder. You're him, aren't you? Charles Bronson. The young man's chewing slowed. He turned to look at me. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. I was not hiding. I was simply sitting in a diner, drinking coffee, the same as anyone else. Charles Bronson, Earl repeated. His voice hushed. I saw every one of your pictures. Every single one. My wife and I, God rest her soul, we never missed a premiere. You were her favorite. She said you had the saddest eyes in Hollywood. I smiled at that. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. The young man had set down his sandwich. He was staring at me now with an expression I had seen before. The recalculation, the sudden reassessment of value. A moment ago I was an old man in a diner, someone to dismiss, someone to talk past. Now I was someone. Wait, he said. You're actually Charles Bronson, the actor? Last I checked. He laughed, a nervous sound. I had no idea. You don't look like, I thought you'd be, he trailed off, realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. I'd be what? Taller? Younger? No, I didn't expect to meet someone like you in a place like this. Someone like me eats. Someone like me needs gas. This place is as good as any, he nodded, but I could see the wheels turning. The young man who measured everything by status was now trying to figure out how to position himself, how to turn this encounter into something he could use, a story for his colleagues, a brush with fame. This is incredible, he said. I'm actually a huge fan. Death Wish, The Mechanic, Once Upon a Time in the West. Classics, absolute classics. I watched him, the same man who 5 minutes ago had slammed his hand on the counter and berated a waitress for a slow sandwich. The same man who had called me old man with contempt in his voice. Now his tone was warm, eager, almost fawning. Thank you, I said. Would you mind if I got a picture? My partners would never believe this. I looked at him for a long moment. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Dolores had moved to the far end of the counter, giving us space, but I could feel her watching. Earl sipped his coffee quietly, his eyes on the dark window. Let me ask you something first, I said. The young man leaned in, expectant. Of course, anything. If Dolores had told you who I was when you walked in, would you have spoken to her the way you did? The question hung in the air. His smile faltered. Would you have slammed your hand on the counter? Would you have complained about the wait? Would you have treated her like her time, her dignity, meant nothing? He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since he had entered the diner, he had no quick response. I wasn't, he started. I didn't mean to. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway, its headlights sweeping briefly across the windows. The young man looked down at his plate. The sandwich sat half-eaten, cooling. I've been in this business for 50 years, I said. I've met studio heads who treated waiters like kings and kings who treated everyone like dirt. I've learned that you can tell everything about a person by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them. He nodded slowly. Not the quick, dismissive nod from earlier. Something slower, something that suggested the words had landed somewhere deeper. Dolores has been on her feet for 10 hours, I continued. The cook in the back just got news that someone he loves is hurting. They showed up anyway. They made your sandwich anyway. That's not inefficiency, that's grace. The young man was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, stripped of the sharp edges. You're right, he said. I've been stressed. This deal, it's been consuming me. But that's not an excuse. No, it's not. He turned on his stool to face Dolores, who had busied herself wiping down the coffee machine. Ma'am? Dolores. She looked up, her expression guarded. I'm sorry, he said, for how I spoke to you. It was wrong. You didn't deserve that. She studied him for a moment. Then her face softened, just slightly, the softening of someone who had learned to forgive because holding on to anger was too heavy a burden. Thank you for saying that, she said. Kitchen's closed now, but I can warm up some pie if you'd like. On the house. He shook his head. No, please. Let me pay, and add whatever he's having. He gestured to me, and Earl's coffee too. Earl raised his cup in acknowledgement. I finished the last of my coffee and stood. My knees protested the way they always did now. The body remembers every stunt, every fall, every year. The young man stood too, extending his hand. I'm Daniel. Daniel Marsh. I don't think I introduced myself. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, but there was something searching in his eyes now, something that had not been there before. Charles, I said. But you knew that. I did. He paused. What you said about the man in Pennsylvania, the one who died in the mines, was he your father? I released his hand and reached for my wallet. He was. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. I placed a few bills on the counter, more than enough for the coffee, but I think about him every day, not because of what he achieved, because of who he was when no one important was watching. Daniel nodded. There was weight in his eyes now, the weight of a lesson received, even if it would take time to fully understand. I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. The night air was cool through the glass, the desert vast and patient beyond the parking lot lights. Daniel. He looked up. The deal you're chasing, the success you're measuring yourself by. Someday you'll be my age. You'll sit in a diner somewhere, and the only thing that will matter is how you made people feel. Not the numbers, not the wins, just the moments when you had a choice between kindness and convenience, and which one you picked. He did not respond, but he was listening. I could tell. Dolores called out as I pushed open the door. Mr. Bronson? It was an honor, a real honor. I tipped an imaginary hat to her, a gesture from another time perhaps. But some gestures are worth keeping. The night air hit my face, cool and clean, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. I walked to my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. Above, the stars were scattered across the sky like spilled salt on a black tablecloth. More stars than you ever see in the city. More stars than most people remember exist. I climbed into the cab and sat for a moment, my hands on the wheel, the engine quiet. I thought about my father, about his hands, rough and scarred, hands that had pulled coal from the earth and built furniture for neighbors, and held my mother when the money ran out and the future looked dark. Hands that had never signed an autograph, never shaken a producer's hand, never been photographed by anyone. He would not have known what to make of my life. The fame, the money, the strange machinery of celebrity. But he would have understood tonight. He would have understood that a man's worth is not found in how the powerful treat him, but in how he treats those with no power at all. I started the engine. The dashboard lights glowed softly. The road to Phoenix stretched ahead, dark and long, and I was in no hurry. Some things cannot be rushed. Some things should not be. I drove through the desert, through the night, through the silence that was not empty but full of stars and distance and the quiet truth that we are all just passing through. We stop at diners, we drink coffee, we meet strangers, and if we are lucky, we leave the places we visit a little better than we found them. That is enough. That has always been enough. The miles unwound beneath me. The radio stayed off. I did not need music. The desert had its own song, old and patient, and I listened to it the way my father once listened to the wind moving through the hills of Pennsylvania. We carry the dead with us, not as burdens, but as teachers. Their voices echo in the choices we make, the pauses we take, the kindness we offer to strangers in small diners on the edge of nowhere. I thought about Daniel, young and hungry and afraid, though he would never admit the fear, chasing something he could not name, measuring himself by metrics that would one day feel hollow. Maybe tonight would stay with him. Maybe it would fade by morning, lost in the noise of deals and deadlines. But maybe not. Sometimes a single moment, a single question, plants a seed, and seeds are patient. They wait in the dark until the conditions are right. Then they grow. The highway curved gently, following the contours of land shaped by millennia of wind and water. I thought about all the roads I had traveled, the ones that led to sound stages and premieres, yes, but also the ones that led here, to quiet places, to encounters that would never make the papers, but mattered more than any headline. Fame is a strange companion. It opens doors, but it also builds walls. People see the image before they see the man. They project their expectations, their memories of characters I played, onto the face in front of them. They forget that actors are just people who pretended for a living. We are not the heroes we portrayed. We are not the villains either. We are just men and women trying to make sense of the time we are given. My father never pretended. He was exactly who he appeared to be. What you saw was what he was. There was no performance, no mask. Just a man doing his best with what he had, in a world that gave him very little and demanded everything. I miss that simplicity. I have spent my life in a world of illusions, of lighting tricks and camera angles and words written by others. And yet the truest things I know I learned in a coal town before I ever saw a movie camera. Be patient, be kind, work hard, treat people well, especially when no one is watching. These are not complicated lessons, but they are easy to forget. The world is loud, and it rewards loudness. It celebrates the fast, the aggressive, the relentless. It tells us that winning matters, that getting there first matters, that being seen and known and followed matters. But at the end, in the quiet hours, what remains? The stars were beginning to fade at the edges of the horizon, the first pale hint of dawn touching the sky. I had been driving for hours, lost in thought, and the desert had given way to the outskirts of something larger. Lights in the distance, the glow of a city waking up. I pulled off the highway at a rest stop, parked the truck and stepped out to stretch my legs. The air was warmer now, the night giving way to day. A few other vehicles dotted the lot, travelers catching sleep before the final push to wherever they were going. I walked to a low stone wall at the edge of the lot and sat down, facing east. The sky was changing, purple and orange bleeding into blue, and I watched it the way I have watched countless sunrises, each one the same and each one different. I thought about Dolores, who would be closing up the diner now, counting tips, rubbing her sore feet. I thought about Earl, who probably had a long drive ahead of him, and who carried his wife's memory like a lamp in the dark. I thought about Daniel, and whether he would call his family today, or say something kind to a stranger, or pause before snapping at someone who could not fight back. We do not know the ripples we create. A word spoken in a diner travels outward in ways we cannot trace. It touches lives we will never meet, shapes moments we will never witness. This is the strange arithmetic of human connection. The sum is always greater than the parts we can see. My father understood this, even if he never would have said it in such words. He understood that every act of kindness is a stone thrown into water, and the ripples go on long after the stone has sunk. I sat on that wall and watched the sun rise, and I felt, as I often do in such moments, both very small and very large. Small because I am one man in a vast world, one brief flicker in the long story of human beings trying to figure out how to live together. Large because I am part of that story, connected to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. The light grew stronger. Cars began to move on the highway, the day beginning in earnest. I stood, my knees complaining again, and walked back to my truck. There was still road ahead, still distance to cover, but I was not in a hurry. Some things cannot be rushed. I climbed in, started the engine, pulled back onto the highway, the sun warm on my face through the windshield. The desert stretched out on either side, ancient and patient, and I drove on, carrying my father with me, carrying the night with me, carrying the quiet truth that I had tried to share with a stranger in a diner. We are all just passing through. The only question is what we leave behind. And the answer, I have come to believe, is simple: kindness, patience, the willingness to see others as fully human, especially when it is inconvenient, especially when they can do nothing for us. That is enough. That has always been enough.